Hey, good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday night devotional for Passion Week. Glad you've decided to take the time to join us, and I hope that tonight will be a blessing to you as well as give you some things to think about. Tonight, we get a heavier topic. It's that of the betrayal of Jesus, which happens in John chapter 13. So if you'd like to grab a Bible or your app and follow along as we go through this together, that would be great. We're going to be in John chapter 13, starting in verse number 21. Now, to set the scene for you, Jesus is sitting with his disciples at the Last Supper. They are celebrating the Passover, and Jesus has been making statements all throughout John chapter 13 about how they're supposed to live their lives after he's gone. He's been making statements about how he's going to be killed and how he's going to come back from the dead, and that people are going to betray him. And we kick off in verse 21. It says, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit, and he testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." Now, if you think about it, he's sitting around the table with 12 of his most trusted people that have been following him for the last 3 years, roughly. And to look at that group and say, one of you is going to be the one who betrays me is a harsh reality. And I'm sure that you are familiar with the story of Judas. And the story goes on here in verses 22 through 23, 24. Basically, Simon Peter and John, who writes this gospel, they both kind of like, well, hey, who is it? And Jesus makes a statement. He goes, whoever I dip the bread in the bowl with, that's him. And basically, he points out Judas, and Judas makes this excuse. Verse 27 says, after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. And Jesus said to him, what you're going to do quickly. Now, no one says in 29, no one at the table knew why he'd said this to him. Some thought that because Judas was the keeper of the money, that he was going to go out and pay for something or take care of something like that. But in reality, from that moment, Judas walks out of Jesus' presence and goes straight to the Jewish council, and there betrays Jesus for money, takes money to turn him over to them. And a lot of times we really look down on Judas, right? And rightly so. He did a pretty bad thing. Matter of fact, the term for Judas has become kind of a euphemism, if you will, for someone who becomes a traitor. And we throw it around. Even our culture, our unchristian culture uses that term quite frequently. And we castigate him. But is Judas that much different than us? You say, whoa, what are you talking about there? Well, here's the reality. Judas followed Jesus just like the rest of the disciples did. He was one of the 12 that was chosen out of all of the disciples that followed Jesus. He was one of the special ones that Jesus selected to actually be closest to him. He had seen all of the miracles happen, even participating in them. When the 12 disciples were sent out at different points in Scripture to go and preach the gospel, they were given power to throw out demons and to heal people and to work miracles and things of that nature. Judas is one of those 12 men. He had heard all of the teachings that Jesus had made, but the difference between him and the rest of the disciples was that Jesus never lived up to Judas's expectations. Now, we don't know, the Bible doesn't tell us what exactly was going on inside of Judas's heart and his life at this moment, but we do know for a fact that at the end of the day, he didn't actually buy into everything that Jesus said and everything that Jesus did. And when push came to shove and it wasn't lining up the way that he wanted it to do, he decided to take matters into his own hands and say, well, if it can't go my way, it's not going to go anybody's way at all. And he allowed Satan to use himself. He gave himself over to greed and to lust for power, and he turned Jesus over. The reality here is that Judas never actually surrendered, which brings me to our point of why we could be a lot like Judas. See, Judas was closer to Jesus than anybody else was, with the exception of Peter and John and James and a few other disciples. As far as people were concerned on earth, Judas was way closer physically than you and I will ever be. And it is incredibly possible to be close to Jesus, super close to Jesus, but miss him completely. Looking from the outside, nobody from the outside would have known that Judas was not fully into Jesus's work or his ministry. And looking from the outside, they just looked at Judas and said, wow, he's one of Jesus' disciples. He goes wherever Jesus goes. He does whatever Jesus does. He does what Jesus tells him to do. He's a good guy from the outside. Maybe the insiders knew who he was a little bit, but we don't have any record of Scripture of them confronting him. Matter of fact, Jesus doesn't confront him either, which I think is really, really important for us to ponder here, is that Judas knew the truth and he was responsible for it. And Jesus wasn't there to judge him. He wasn't there to confront him or push the issue. God was going to do that at some point, and we see that later in Scripture where God does judge Judas for his actions. But at this point in time, Judas was that close to truth and missed it. And I wonder how often that's the same thing for us, where it doesn't quite line up the way we want it to. He was expected to know. He was responsible for that knowledge. And I think that sometimes we are in the same boat. It is incredibly easy to call yourself a follower of Christ. Matter of fact, most people, I think the last time I looked at these numbers, 60% of people in the United States called themselves Christians or followers of Christ. Now we know out of reality, that number of real Christians, of people who actually follow Christ, is much, much, much lower. But we assimilate into that culture, and we become something that maybe isn't exactly what Jesus envisioned. Where maybe we're super, super close to Jesus, but we're doing our own thing. We're using Jesus and Christianity as a ride to get to where we want to go. And at the moment when it stops functioning the way we want it to, or it forces us to do something that doesn't fit what we think life should be, we walk away. See, the world isn't the enemy here. It's the sin that's in our own hearts. And that was what Judas struggled with. It wasn't all of the external forces that were at play here. It was the lust and the greed that was in his own heart. It was his own desire for power, his own desire for authority, and his hope that maybe Jesus could elevate him that made him do what he wanted to do. It wasn't the world's fault that he was messed up. It was his own sin in his own heart, and the same could be true for you and me. When we give into that sin, we betray the one who saved us. You say, Brad, that's harsh, but that's reality. When we choose to willingly sin, when we choose to love things that are not God and to work in that direction, we are doing the exact same thing that Judas did 2,000 years ago. Did he have remorse after the fact? Absolutely. Was it enough to change anything? No, it wasn't. And so I throw out to you again, it is possible to be incredibly close to Jesus and completely miss him all at the same time. I'd like you tonight, if after this is over, if you would take a few minutes and read the entirety of John chapter 13. It kind of sets the stage, and Jesus leaves some final commandments for his disciples. You also see Peter, who runs into the same issue. Is he going to believe in Jesus even when things get difficult? Tonight's a difficult topic, the betrayal of Jesus. There's not a lot of hope here, but hope is coming. And in spite of everything that people have been doing, Jesus still forgives people and still extends grace and mercy to people like you and me who have made horrible decisions. And so tonight, please take a few moments to read through this chapter. We would love for you to join us again tomorrow night as we're going to be looking at another piece of scripture leading up to Jesus' death and then his burial and his resurrection. And I hope you'll join us Easter Sunday morning as we celebrate that together. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.